There are words that only appear in the hush before the world wakes, whispers carried on the breath of dawn, meant not to be heard with the ears, but with the soul. Rumi once wrote, "The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep." And perhaps he meant more than just morning. Perhaps he meant the quiet space before you become who the world expects you to be. Because there are parts of you that can only surface when everything else has been stripped away. Your roles, your name, your noise. Beneath the endless scroll, behind the practiced smile, before the first memory and after the last breath, there is a presence, a witness, a being not defined by reaction or achievement, but by stillness. This self is not discovered in crowds or found in mirrors. It is remembered in silence, born in solitude. It waits, patiently, quietly, for your return. We fear solitude not because we fear being alone, but because in the absence of distraction, the masks begin to fall. Around others, we learn how to shape ourselves, how to speak to be liked, how to smile to be accepted, how to hide just enough to fit. But when no one is watching, when the performance ends, you're left with only your own breath. And that is where the journey begins. Rumi did not romanticize isolation. He revered it. He called it sacred. A little while alone in your room will prove more valuable than anything else that could ever be given you. That is not poetry. It is prophecy. Because the soul does not awaken under fluorescent lights or in constant company. It stirs when the noise dies, when the stories fall silent, and when the only voice left is the one you've tried not to hear. In solitude, you begin to notice the quiet ache beneath your accomplishments, the thoughts that flutter like trapped birds, the emotions you've never named. And slowly, something starts to shift. You're no longer being watched. There is no one to impress, no one to convince. And without the need to perform, the deeper truth begins to rise. Not the curated self you've built, but the eternal one beneath. At first, the silence may feel unbearable, loud with the echoes you've spent a lifetime avoiding. But if you stay, if you sit still in the fire of your own presence, a kind of melting begins. The stories lose their grip. The pain starts to soften. The walls you built for protection begin to crumble. And underneath the armor, you find not weakness, but rawness, humanity, a wholeness that does not need to be fixed, only felt. Solitude, then, is not a retreat from life. It is a return to it. Because how can you truly meet another if you have never fully met yourself? How can you love honestly if you've never faced the parts of yourself you've exiled in shame? The quiet teaches you. It reminds you that you are not your wounds, not your roles, not your history. You are the awareness behind all of it, the one who watches, who breathes, who waits. And this watcher, this essence, does not demand, it does not shout, it does not argue, it only waits for surrender. And when you finally stop resisting your own company, it rises, like a soft dawn over a forgotten sea, not to dazzle, not to explain, but simply to remind you, you have never been separate. You were always here. To sit alone is to enter a fire, not one that burns the skin, but one that scorches the illusions you've clung to for a lifetime. It is not gentle at first. The stillness confronts you. It reflects back everything you've suppressed, the ache behind your ambition, the fear hidden inside your laughter, the longing that pulses beneath your daily distractions. Solitude strips away the outer garments, the identities, the stories, the masks, until only the bare soul remains, blinking in the quiet light. And yet, this is where truth begins. Not in comfort, not in clarity, but in the discomfort of honesty, in the trembling recognition that much of what you've called yourself was a performance learned for survival. Rumi did not seek to escape the world. He sought to enter it more fully, and he knew that the doorway was solitude. In silence, he met his God not as a figure in the clouds, but as a presence that lived in his own breath. He did not preach detachment from life. He surrendered to it so deeply that the boundaries between his heartbeat and the universe began to dissolve. And this is what silence can teach us. Not how to withdraw, but how to become more intimate with reality. When the noise dies down, when there is nothing left to distract you from yourself, a deeper voice begins to whisper. It says, "You are not your pain. You are not your performance. You are not even your thoughts. You are the space they move through. You are the one who watches." But to reach that voice, to hear it clearly, you must walk through the fire. You must be willing to feel the things you've avoided, the grief, the shame, the hollow loneliness that no achievement can fill. You must stop turning away. You must stay, not as punishment, but as a sacred reckoning. This is not the darkness of despair. It is the darkness of planting. Seeds are buried before they bloom. The soul is softened before it opens. If you can sit through that holy discomfort, if you can resist the urge to run or distract or numb, you will find that the silence is not empty at all. It is full of wisdom, of presence, of an ancient stillness that has been waiting for you since the beginning. This is what Rumi knew. This is what he lived. That transformation is not something we chase. It is something we allow. It arrives when we stop running, when we stop needing answers and begin to surrender to the question itself. Solitude is the fire that refines, not to punish, but to purify. It peels away everything false so that what is real, what has always been real, can rise. And when it does not come as a concept or a philosophy. It comes as peace, as presence, as the quiet knowing, I am here. I have always been here. I am not broken. I am becoming. When the world falls silent, it becomes a mirror. Not the kind you glance into before leaving the house, but the kind that reveals the invisible. The mirror without a frame, one that shows not your face, but your essence. In solitude, without the gaze of others to shape you, without the reflex to perform, what remains is startling, just you, raw and unedited. And in that nakedness, something sacred stirs. You begin to notice not just your thoughts, but the one who observes them. You notice your breath, not as a function, but as a prayer. You begin to feel, not as reaction, but as awareness. This is where the true journey begins. Not when you change, but when you finally see. Rumi spoke of this moment often. The moment when the veil lifts and the soul glimpses its own reflection, not in others, but within. He did not teach that we must become something new. He taught that we must unlearn everything that is not us. The world has given you names, roles, expectations, son, daughter, lover, success, failure. But none of those hold the weight of your being. In solitude, those names begin to slip from your shoulders like old coats. You remember that before you were anything, you were. That being is enough. That being is sacred. And yet, we resist this mirror because it does not flatter. It does not lie. It does not edit the angles or soften the lighting. It shows us our confusion, our hidden griefs, the masks we didn't know we wore. And it invites us, with terrifying tenderness, to let them go. Not all at once, but layer by layer, breath by breath. The mirror does not demand perfection. It simply waits for honesty. And when we are finally honest, even in our trembling, it does not punish. It embraces. It shows us that we are not our mistakes, not our doubts, not even our pain. We are the presence that holds them all. This is why the mystics withdrew not to escape the world, but to find the self that is untouched by it, the self that does not need applause to exist, that does not dissolve under rejection. In solitude, the heart speaks in ways it cannot in noise. It remembers its own rhythm. It begins to trust again, not others, not the future, but the ground beneath its own feet. And from that trust, a new kind of strength is born. Not the strength of armor, but the strength of openness, of being soft without shattering, of being quiet without disappearing, of being alone but never abandoned. Solitude, then, becomes a sanctuary, not because it shields you from life, but because it returns you to the place where life first began, the breath, the heartbeat, the watcher behind the eyes. And in that return, the mirror shows you not who you should become, but who you already are, whole, worthy, enough. There is an ache that arises in stillness, a kind of echo from the chambers of the soul, long sealed and forgotten. It is not pain in the usual sense. It does not scream or demand, but hums beneath the surface like a forgotten song. And when the world grows quiet, when the phone is turned off, the lights dim, and the performance ends, you begin to feel it. You begin to hear that quiet ache pressing against your ribs, whispering not words, but truth. This is the part of you that has waited, not for love from others, but for you to return to yourself. Rumi never avoided this ache. He welcomed it like a guest who carries a message from beyond. He once wrote, "Don't turn away. Keep looking at the bandaged place. That's where the light enters you." He knew that the soul does not grow through avoidance. It blossoms through presence, through standing still before the ache and saying, "I will not run from you this time." Because within that ache is memory, not just of wounds, but of wisdom. The longing you feel is not just for peace or clarity or even God. It is the longing to remember yourself, the self before fear, before performance, before forgetting. This ache is holy. It is not a flaw to be fixed, but a doorway. It is not weakness, but invitation. In modern life, we are taught to numb it, with screens, with work, with constant motion. But the mystics did the opposite. They sat with it. They made it tea. They let it speak. Because they understood that the soul's language is not always bright and beautiful. Sometimes it is aching and wordless, but it is always true. And in that truth, there is power. Not the power of domination, but the power of softness, the strength to remain, to feel, to heal. The ache beneath the silence does not ask you to solve it. It does not demand resolution. It simply asks for recognition. It asks you to sit beside it as you would a child who is grieving, not to explain it away, but to be with it, to listen, to breathe. In that listening, you discover something surprising, that your ache is not a wound at all, but a compass. It points not to what's wrong with you, but to what matters most. It points to your forgotten dreams, your unspoken prayers, your truest longings. And in honoring it, you begin to come alive again, not in loud, dramatic ways, but in the quiet, knowing that you are no longer running. So let the ache rise. Let it break your rhythm. Let it interrupt your plans. Because beneath that ache is a deeper stillness, one that is not absence, but presence. And when you stop fighting it, when you let yourself feel what you were always meant to feel, the silence no longer aches, it sings. Once the silence has settled, and the ache beneath it has been heard, something begins to shift within. It's subtle, almost imperceptible at first, like the soft stirring of wind before the dawn. But it is real. It is the voice of your soul, not speaking in sentences or language, but in sensation, in knowing, in presence. You do not hear it with your ears. You feel it in the stillness that fills the room after the last distraction fades. It is not loud, not insistent, but it is honest. Painfully, beautifully honest. And if you listen closely, it begins to guide you home. Rumi understood that the soul does not speak in noise. It does not compete with the world. It waits quietly, like a friend sitting beside you, saying nothing but offering everything. When you make space, true space, the soul steps forward, not with demands, but with presence. It may show you an image from your past or a longing you buried long ago. It may reveal a grief you've never fully touched or a love you've never let yourself feel. But whatever arises, it comes from the deepest truth of who you are, the part of you untouched by time, unshaped by culture, unscarred by expectation. This is the language of the sacred self, and it is not fluent in performance. It does not care how others see you. It is not interested in status or safety. It only wants your authenticity, your full, unguarded presence. In solitude, when all outer roles are dropped, you begin to feel it, the quiet urge to create, not for approval, but for expression. The longing to forgive, not for others, but to free yourself. The tenderness toward your own imperfections, which no longer feel like flaws, but like fingerprints of your humanity. This is where the real journey begins, not in becoming someone else, but in finally becoming yourself. Rumi once wrote, "There is a voice that doesn't use words. Listen. That voice is your soul, and it has waited your entire life for this moment, for you to be quiet enough to hear it, brave enough to follow it, and loving enough to trust it. It does not lead you where you expected. It leads you where you belong. And where you belong is not a place, but a presence, a way of being in the world that feels like home. So do not rush to fill the silence again. Do not fear the stillness now that it has opened. Stay. Sit. Let the inner voice speak not in answers, but in truth. Because once you hear it, truly hear it, you will never again mistake the noise of the world for the music of your soul. As the inner voice grows clearer, you begin to understand that this journey is not about acquiring new truths, but unlearning the illusions you have lived by. You start to notice how many of your choices have been echoes of other people's expectations. How often your thoughts are not truly your own, but inherited fears dressed up as reason. And in this noticing, something essential begins to awaken, the capacity to truly see yourself, not as the world has shaped you, but as you were before the world ever touched you. This seeing is not the same as thinking. It does not analyze or judge. It does not compare or categorize. It simply witnesses, gently, fiercely, lovingly. In its presence, shame has nowhere to hide. Pride has nothing to cling to. You begin to look at your wounds not as disfigurements, but as entry points into deeper compassion. You see your patterns, the ones that sabotage, the ones that isolate, not as failures, but as outdated strategies that once kept you safe. And in that realization, a tenderness arises. You no longer need to fight yourself. You begin to forgive what you once tried to fix. Rumi spoke of this with disarming clarity. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. This is what inner seeing does. It reveals the barriers. It brings them into light not to condemn, but to soften them, to loosen their grip, to prepare the soil for something true to grow. You become less interested in who you thought you should be, and more curious about who you actually are. The masks start to fall away, not because you try to remove them, but because they simply no longer feel necessary. This sacred mirror of self-awareness is not cold or harsh. It is warm, intimate, and alive. It does not scold you for your shadows. It welcomes them. It says, even this belongs. And in that welcome, your most hidden parts, the ones you feared would never be loved, begin to step into the light. They do not scream. They do not demand. They simply say, see me, love me. And when you do, something ancient in you exhales. You remember that you are not here to be perfect. You are here to be whole. And so you keep sitting. You keep listening. You keep seeing. Because with each moment of honest reflection, you are drawn closer to your essence, not the polished self you present to the world, but the raw, luminous self that has always been waiting beneath the noise. This is not self-improvement. This is self-remembrance, and it is holy. As the layers of illusion fall away and the sacred mirror continues to reveal, you begin to sense that the intellect can only take you so far. Its precision, its logic, its hunger for definition, all of it falters at the doorway of the soul. What lives beyond that threshold cannot be dissected or defined. It speaks a different language, one not made of words, but of presence, the language of the heart. The heart does not argue. It does not need proof. Its knowing is quiet, but complete. You begin to feel this language not as something new, but as something you've always known, like remembering a song you forgot you loved. It speaks in warmth, in longing, in stillness. It speaks in the soft pull toward truth, the inner trembling when you touch something sacred, the sudden peace that comes without a reason. And the more you listen, the more you begin to trust it. Rumi knew this language well. His verses pulse with it. Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray. That strange pull, it is the heart's compass, the soul's whisper. It does not shout. It does not demand. But it is persistent. And once you begin to feel it, you cannot unfeel it. You begin to recognize that most of your suffering came not from what happened, but from the times you ignored this inner pull. When you said yes, but meant no. When you stayed, but longed to leave. When you silenced your truth in order to keep the peace, not knowing that the peace you kept was only ever external. And so you start to live differently, not recklessly, but honestly. You begin to ask yourself, what do I truly feel here? Not what should I feel? Not what do others expect me to feel, but what is genuinely alive in me now. And this shift changes everything. Conversations deepen. Small moments become sacred. Your very presence begins to soften, not because you're trying, but because you're no longer pretending. The mask of composure gives way to the face of authenticity, and the world, sensing your sincerity, opens to meet you in return. This is not an easy path. To live from the heart is to walk in vulnerability, to feel deeply even when it hurts, to stay open even when you've been wounded. But there is a power in this openness, not the brittle power of control, but the resilient strength of truth. A heart that is open and honest becomes unbreakable, not because it cannot be hurt, but because it no longer fears the hurt. It allows love to move through it, like wind through an open window. And in that movement, there is healing, not just for you, but for everyone your presence touches. The journey continues. And now, it is no longer guided by maps or teachings, but by a quiet pulse within, steady, sincere, sacred. The heart has taken the lead, and it knows the way. There is a moment on the path, after silence has spoken, after presence has softened the edges of self, where something deeper begins to stir. Not clarity, not peace, not even love as we typically understand it, but a raw, aching tenderness that seems to rise from the soul itself. It is not a pain exactly, though it hurts. It is not desire, though it pulls you. It is something older than words, the sacred ache of longing. This longing is not a flaw in your spirit. It is not something to be fixed, ignored, or numbed. It is the most honest part of you, the thread that ties your finite body to the infinite sky. Rumi spoke of this ache not with disdain, but with reverence. This longing you express is the return message, he wrote. The grief you cry out from draws you toward union. The ache is not the absence of something. It is the presence of the beloved, whispering beneath the noise, calling you home. And so you begin to feel it everywhere, in the quiet after music, in the space between thoughts, in the tear that arrives without explanation. The longing comes not to torment you, but to awaken you, to remind you that there is more to this life than comfort, more to your soul than pleasure, more to your heart than happiness. It draws you away from what is temporary toward what is eternal. It stretches you, opens you, prepares you to be filled with something vast and holy. You begin to see that all your searching, all your striving for success, for companionship, for meaning, were ways of trying to name this ache. And yet, the ache itself was the answer. It was the compass all along. The mistake was never in longing. It was in thinking you had to fix it. You were never meant to soothe it into silence. You were meant to follow it, because this longing is a sacred flame, and those who follow it are never led astray. The Sufis call this shock the soul's desire for divine reunion. It is a hunger for what cannot be touched, a thirst for what cannot be poured. And yet, it nourishes, it sustains, it refines. Every time your heart breaks open with longing, another layer of falsehood falls away. You become softer, humbler, more attuned to truth. The ache teaches you how to kneel without shame, how to yearn without demand. It teaches you how to love without needing to possess, and eventually, you stop asking when the longing will end. You stop searching for resolution. You begin to see that the ache itself is a gift, because what it aches for is real. And in that sacred longing, you are already in communion, already being held, already being called. You do not need to arrive. You only need to feel. Let yourself feel. The path of longing inevitably leads us into fire, not a fire that burns to destroy, but one that purifies, reshapes, and reveals. Transformation is not a graceful unfolding. It is a fierce, sacred dismembering. The soul does not evolve in silence and serenity alone. It is carved open by loss, by surrender, by the things we do not choose. And yet, in that fire, something essential begins to emerge. The soul does not seek comfort. It seeks truth. And truth is often found in the ashes of what we once called ourselves. Rumi did not flinch before this fire. He stepped willingly into its heat, letting it consume everything in him that was not rooted in love. Try to be like a melting snow, he said. Wash yourself of yourself. In these words is a wisdom most modern minds resist, that we are not here to protect our egos, but to melt them. That the self we cling to, the titles, the masks, the stories, is not the self we are becoming. In the fire, we are not punished. We are revealed. This sacred burning asks everything from us. It will strip away our false identities, our tightly held beliefs, our carefully curated image of who we thought we were. It will dismantle the illusions we've used as armor. And in those moments, we will be tempted to turn back, to run to comfort, to claim that the fire is too much. But if we stay, if we remain, we begin to see we are not what is burning. We are what remains, and what remains is something indestructible. The fire becomes a mirror. It reflects everything you still fear, everything you still grasp, every part of you still built on the fear of being unworthy. It shows you the grief you have yet to grieve, the rage you've swallowed, the love you've withheld. But it also shows you what can never be taken: your essence, the still, luminous center beneath all the smoke, the part of you that does not change, the part that has waited patiently to rise. And so we stop begging to be spared from transformation. We stop asking for the fire to leave us untouched. Instead, we open. We offer our trembling hearts to the flame, trusting that the soul knows how to rise from its own ruins. We begin to see that every scar is a doorway, every wound a chance to touch the infinite. And in this surrender, a strange peace begins to bloom. Not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of alignment. You are not becoming something new. You are shedding everything that is not you. And in that shedding, you shine. After the fire, after the burning away of what no longer serves, there is silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of presence. A deep, ancient quiet that does not need to be filled. This is not the absence of sound. It is the fullness of stillness. A living silence breathing through everything, speaking not in words, but in knowing. And in that knowing, you finally understand. There was never anything to prove. You were always enough. Rumi described this state not as a reward, but as a homecoming, a return to the place within you that has never moved. Silence, he wrote, is the language of God. All else is poor translation. This is the silence you fall into when the noise of the world fades and the noise within no longer controls you. It does not shout. It waits. And when you are ready, it receives you like the sea receives a river, fully, without resistance. In this sacred hush, a strange clarity arises. You begin to hear not voices, but resonance, not ideas, but essence. There is no need to search, only to listen. The self that always needed validation, attention, significance, begins to dissolve. And what remains is spaciousness, an inner sky without boundaries. You are no longer caught in reaction. You are witnessing. You are being. But silence is not always soft. It can confront as much as it comforts. In its mirror, you will see what you've avoided: the grief unspoken, the joy unexplored, the truth you couldn't bear to name. It brings it all forth, not to punish, but to free. Because only in truth can love root itself. Only in honesty can the divine find fertile ground. This is the alchemy of silence. It strips you until you shine. And still, the mind will ask, what do I do in this silence? But that is the old language. In silence, there is no doing, only being. No agenda, no technique. Just the radical act of stopping, of sitting, of breathing and allowing and feeling and opening. Until, slowly, the soul begins to remember its own sound. This is where the journey deepens. This is where presence begins to speak. Not as an idea or emotion, but as a current, subtle and unwavering. In the silence, the beloved is not absent. The beloved is everywhere. You begin to see with inner eyes. You begin to feel with the heart, not with the story. And here, finally, you rest. Not in laziness, but in surrender. You are not empty. You are full. Not full of answers, but full of aliveness. You do not need to strive for truth. You are seated in it. And in that truth, a gentleness returns, a humility, a grace. The journey has not made you better. It has made you real. There comes a time when even silence must move. When the stillness that held and healed you begins to overflow, not as a command, not as a compulsion, but as a quiet desire to live from what has been remembered. Presence, once discovered within, now begins to take form in the world. You do not return as who you were. You return as awareness dressed in human skin. The journey inward does not end in isolation. It finds its fullness in embodiment. Rumi understood this movement. His silence became poetry. His surrender became dance. His solitude birthed communion. He did not stay in the cave, though the cave had awakened him. He returned to the streets, to the people, to the dust and the breath of everyday life. But he returned different. He walked not to get anywhere, but as one who had nowhere to go, because he had already arrived. To walk as presence is not to float above the world. It is to enter it more fully. It is to feel the wind as the beloved's breath, to hear the cry of a child as your own, to see in every stranger the reflection of what you once forgot. You no longer need grand revelations. The ordinary is drenched in the holy. A sip of tea becomes a sacred rite, a conversation, a chance to touch the soul behind the mask. But presence is not passive. It does not ignore pain. It does not bypass discomfort. Rather, it holds them with eyes that do not flinch. To be present is to be courageous, to let what is be what it is, without resistance or manipulation. This is not resignation. It is the deepest form of love, a love that does not grasp, a love that does not fix, a love that simply remains. In this state, the need to prove dissolves. The urge to perform fades. You begin to trust life again, not because it gives you what you want, but because you no longer need it to. You trust because you are anchored not in outcomes, but in truth. You are no longer searching. You are walking as the one who is found. And what you found was not a teaching or a technique. You found yourself, raw, radiant, unrepeatable, and now every step is prayer. Every breath, a remembering. Every encounter, an invitation. You are not here to escape the world. You are here to bring presence into it, not as an ideal, but as a lived experience. The mystic does not flee life. The mystic walks into it, eyes open, heart bare, hands unclenched. So when the winds rise, you don't brace, you soften. When the ground shakes, you don't grasp, you ground deeper. When joy comes, you don't cling, you welcome. When sorrow knocks, you open the door and say, "Come in, I know your name." This is the miracle of the journey. Not that it changes what happens, but that it transforms who you are within it. You become the quiet in the storm. You become the light behind the eyes. You become the one who remembers that all of this, the mess, the beauty, the ache, the wonder, it's all love, wearing every mask imaginable. And now, finally, you're ready to meet it all. As presence takes root within, the world no longer appears as it once did. It ceases to be a place to conquer or survive and becomes instead a mirror, vast, living, intimate. Every face you pass, every voice you hear, every shadow and shimmer begins to echo something deeper. Not outside of you, but within. You realize that life has always been trying to show you yourself, not the self shaped by fear or name, but the one shaped by wonder, by silence, by the beloved's breath. Rumi walked through the world with this vision. He didn't see others as obstacles or strangers. He saw them as parts of himself in disguise. He wrote, "You are not a drop in the ocean. You are the entire ocean in a drop." What he meant was that nothing stands apart. The wind, the grief, the laughter, the waiting. It is all made of the same source. It is all infused with the same presence. Once you have touched the center of yourself, you begin to see that center everywhere, and so judgment begins to fall away. Slowly, gently, without fanfare. You no longer divide life into sacred and ordinary. The sacred is in the ordinary. The divine is not confined to temples or scriptures. It is in the way someone's eyes soften when they feel seen. It is in the quiet resilience of a tree standing alone in a storm. It is in your own heartbeat, steady and loyal, even when you forget to listen. This is what Rumi's poetry teaches us. The world is not something to fear or escape. It is a scripture written in form, in sound, in sensation. It is a mirror not of our preferences, but of our presence. And sometimes that mirror shows us beauty, and sometimes it shows us pain. But always, it shows us what is real. To walk through life in this way is to live with your heart uncovered. It is not safe, not in the way the ego wants safety. You will feel more. You will ache more. But you will also love more. You will begin to feel everything as if for the first time, not filtered through defense, but met with presence. That is the gift and the cost of awakening. You cannot go back to numbness once you have known what it is to be truly alive. And perhaps this is what the mystics meant when they said, the world is illusion. Not that the world is false, but that the way we usually see it is incomplete. Through the lens of fear, we see threat. Through the lens of ego, we see competition. But through the lens of love, we see unity. We see that everything we long for is already here, not as a promise, but as a possibility. The moment we stop resisting what is, the veil lifts and life reveals its face. And it is your face, and it is mine, and it is God's, wearing the mask of dust and breath and bone. The world becomes not something we move through, but something we dance with. Not something to fix, but something to bless. You bless it simply by being here, fully, honestly, gently. You bless it with your gaze, your silence, your willingness to see beyond appearances. This is not philosophy. This is not belief. This is the lived truth of the awakened heart. And when you live from that truth, the world cannot help but reflect it back. Not always in ease, but always in essence. You no longer ask, what can I get from this moment? Instead, you ask, what is this moment asking me to see? And in that question, the mirror becomes clear. You see not just the world, you see yourself. And slowly, impossibly, you begin to fall in love, not with an idea, not with a story, but with what is. There comes a point in the journey when there is no longer a destination. Not because you've arrived, but because you've realized there was nowhere else to be. The longing quiets, the ache softens. You stop measuring your growth by how much you've changed, and instead, begin to notice how present you've become. You are no longer chasing wholeness. You are noticing it, like a soft glow that has always been there beneath your striving. What once felt distant now feels native. What once felt hidden now rests calmly in your breath. This is not the end of the path. This is its beginning, because now, finally, you carry the silence within you. You don't need to sit alone in a room to remember the truth. You carry the room with you. The silence has become portable. The presence has become your second skin. You speak not to impress or persuade, but to extend the stillness between your words. You listen, not to reply, but to feel the divine move in another's voice. Even the mundane becomes luminous. The washing of dishes, the closing of a door, the way sunlight slants through a window at dusk. Everything is imbued with tenderness when your heart is finally open enough to see it. But this tenderness is not weakness. It is not soft because it is fragile. It is soft because it is strong enough not to harden. The awakened heart is the fiercest thing in the world, not because it resists pain, but because it no longer runs from it. Rumi knew this. He did not teach the path of avoidance. He taught the path of surrender. He did not promise comfort. He promised truth. And truth, once seen, cannot be unseen. Once felt, it marks you. And so, you carry that mark, not as a badge, but as a subtle fragrance. Others may not know what changed, but they feel it. They feel it in your gaze, your stillness, your ease. You no longer demand that the world fulfill your longing, because the longing has turned inward and become love. The kind of love that doesn't grasp or possess. The kind of love that simply holds, sees, allows. You've become the friend you were always searching for, the guide you hoped would arrive, the presence you once believed was far away. And now, as the outer world pulls you back into its noise, the schedules, the stories, the pace of becoming, you are not afraid. You do not lose what you've found, because what you've found is not a place, not a feeling, not even a state. It is a truth, a presence, a light that remains. It remains when you forget. It remains when you falter. It remains when you fall asleep again into the old rhythms of fear and proving and performance. Because the path is not a straight line. It is a spiral. You return to the same places, but you return with new eyes. And that is what transforms everything. Not that the world changes, but that your seeing does. You walk differently now. You love differently. You meet others not with agenda, but with presence. You are no longer trying to fix them or change them or even save them. You simply see them, and in that seeing, something sacred happens. They begin to see themselves. This is what it means to carry the light. Not to shine so others look at you, but to shine so they remember their own light. Rumi did not say, "Follow me." He said, "Become the light you long for." And in doing so, he lit a path we are still walking. A path not of perfection, but of presence. A path not to God, but with God. A path not of answers, but of intimacy. And so we arrive not at a final step, but a returning to the world, to ourselves, to this moment. We do not return empty. We return filled with a light that does not flicker, because it is not made of flame. It is made of stillness, of truth, of love, and it is yours to carry now. And now, beloved soul, the circle closes, not with a conclusion, but with a turning inward so complete that even the journey dissolves. You look back, not to retrace steps, but to bless them. Every ache, every silence, every longing that once felt like distance was, in truth, a part of the beloved's call. You were never outside the embrace. You were never walking alone. The very seeking was the evidence of the sacred already whispering through your ribs. And now, you see that clearly. You see that even your forgetting was part of the remembering. This return is not to a place, nor even to a version of yourself, but to a state of being so raw, so whole, so open, it cannot be named. It is not enlightenment, not transcendence, not achievement. It is you, undressed of every mask, unburdened of every expectation, untouched by every role. You no longer need to disappear to find your soul. You no longer need the silence of forests or the poetry of saints to hear what is already speaking in your own breath. The beloved is here, in the space between your thoughts, in the pause before your next word, in the rhythm of your walking, in the gentle way your hands hold a cup of water, in the trembling way your eyes meet another's and see through the surface. This is the sacred ordinary. This is the life that Rumi spun for. Not a life of performance or perfection, but a life of intimacy with the real. He did not climb mountains to reach the divine. He danced in circles until the divine revealed itself everywhere. And that is the invitation now. Not to become something new, but to live from what you've always been. To bring the stillness into movement. To bring the silence into sound. To bring the love you found in solitude into the noise of the world. Not to preach, not to convert, but to embody. Because the greatest teaching you can offer is your presence. The greatest prayer you can speak is your being. Let your life become that prayer. Let your breath become that poem. Let your silence become that blessing. This is not a farewell. This is not an ending. This is a beginning so vast it cannot be seen all at once. A beginning that arrives disguised as your next conversation, your next doubt, your next joy, your next mundane act of washing the dishes or touching a hand. The sacred is not elsewhere. It is here. It is now. It is always. So carry what you have remembered like a lamp within your chest. Let it light your way, not with certainty, but with tenderness. You will forget again, and you will return again. That is the rhythm. That is the grace. Even when you fall asleep, the beloved does not leave. Even when you close your eyes to the light, it continues to shine. Because what you have touched in the silence is not a moment. It is your nature. It is what you are. And in Rumi's final invitation, come, come, whoever you are, though you've broken your vows 1,000 times, come yet again. He is not calling you forward. He is calling you home, to the love that waits within, to the stillness that holds it all, to the vastness that breathes beneath your name. Come, not as the seeker. Come, not as the learned. Come, not as the healed. Come, simply as you are, and stay.